G'day folks, Ziggy D here. Legion Jewels continue to be a very potent source of additional power for a lot of builds in Path of Exile, and for the longest time, the mechanic of how they work, the seed system, and how that distributes buffs to certain nodes around the tree randomly, was unsolved. It was a thing that the players couldn't figure out how to reverse engineer. So, for the longest time, we had to be content with just randomly trying timeless jewels until we got one that was good enough. Well, as you've seen from some of my recent videos, technology and the Path of Exile community marches on, and timeless jewels have indeed been solved. There's been a couple tools that have been tinkering with this, and there may have been some private tools prior to that moment, maybe, possibly. But for now, we all have access to a damn fine new feature in none other than, of course, Path of Building. In a recent video, I covered the ridiculously powerful system where Path of Building can find DPS upgrades for you. Well, now Path of Building can find your ideal timeless jewel for you as well. It's pretty easy to miss new features to Path of Building because it's such a detailed piece of software that has so much to it. So, you'll be forgiven for missing this one. But down here is a new button, Find Timeless Jewel. Now, before we click on that, I have a recommendation. Set your tree in your build-up. Set your character up, and even do your configurations for DPS and things like that, because that can help, potentially, depending on the build. But for the main part, make sure at least that your passive skill tree is set up how you want it to be when you'll have that timeless jewel equipped. Also consider any nodes that you haven't yet equipped, consider allocating them. So for example, later on, I'll switch to crit. At the moment, I am not crit, so I don't have these nodes, but I will later swap to them, so it's a good idea to allocate them for this feature. This is because it'll tell the software, the tool, that we will have access to this notable for getting buffs from the Legion Jewel. So once we've allocated our tree correctly, we'll click Find Timeless Jewel, and in here, we'll have the new feature. The first thing you want to do is select your jewel type. So for my build, I'll be doing Lethal Pride. And then if you want a specific keystone, select it here, so you can see which keystone is given by which particular god. Now, I do recommend if you don't care about the keystones and just want other aspects of the jewel, then make sure you select any, because otherwise you'll be limiting your choices to only 1/3 of all possible jewels. So we will stick with any. And then of course you want to select your jewel socket. As usual, the helpful feature, if you mouse over, it'll show you which jewel socket that is that you're going to be allocating. And then this is the reason why I had you allocate those nodes that you plan on taking on your build earlier, because you can use this filter nodes tool. So checking this box will allow you to make sure that it's only looking at jewels that would put the stats that you want on the nodes that you have allocated. Otherwise, if you don't check that box, you might get something like the thing that you want. So for in my case, Intimidate, for example, might end up on Silent Steps, a node that you really don't want to take. So really good idea to allocate those nodes and check that box for filter nodes. So we'll ignore these node weights for just a second, and I'll direct your eyes to this search for node box. Now conveniently, all of the options for this currently selected jewel type are in a list here, so you can find first the thing that is most important to you to have on a jewel. So for me, that is Intimidate, because that's a very nice boost of damage in my build. As such, I will select Intimidate from the drop-down box. Now there's a couple ways that you can tweak the end search results that you'll get, and that's done with the node weighting system. So primary node weight assigns a value to this particular affix. So affixes that you value more, or nodes that you value more, you can give a higher weighting. So the default is 1, but you could set this to say 2 if you say this is a higher priority. This is useful if you have a node that you would really like, but it's not 100% necessary. You can give it a higher weighting. That's because when you click search, it'll create a list of jewels, and it'll say, this jewel here has a combined weighting of 6 because it has 3 instances of Intimidate. If I populate this list with other things, you'll start to get jewels with a mixture of those particular nodes, and then it'll give these things a higher weighting in the results and push those ones to the top. For the most part, I tend to leave the weightings to 1 and then think about the nodes that I absolutely must have. So I absolutely must have a Lethal Pride with Intimidate. As such, we'll actually use this minimum node weight. Now you can use these sliders to adjust it, but I find it very finicky. I prefer to actually just manually edit the number. So we'll add 1, and then we'll make the primary node weight 1. What that means is that this has a weighting of 1, And there absolutely must be one of these on there. So if we then go and add other nodes to this, so for example, I'll add life, always fantastic, and I give that a weighting of 1, but I can leave this as 0, so I can say I'd really like it to have life, but it doesn't absolutely must have life. So I can search now, and this one has a weighting of 5, a combined weighting of 5. It's got 4 life affixes and the mandatory intimidate that I had. Now, if I made this 0, for example, so if I said that I like intimidate, it's on my list, but I don't absolutely have to have it, and then I did a search, then I might get jewels like this. This has 5 life nodes on it. Fantastic if you want life, but it doesn't have that intimidate. But I'm like, I actually do really want that intimidate. So I'll use that minimum node weight and set that to 1. And now it'll ensure that I get jewels with at least 1 intimidate on them. Sometimes you'll see multiple, but for the most part, you'll see I just get the 1 there. Now, if I weigh life particularly highly and I have a longer list, I could put life a little bit higher. So I could say it has a primary weight of 2. So then when I search, it'll say that this jewel is a value of 9 now because it's got 1 intimidate and it's got all of those lives, each which are worth 2. It'll compare that more favorably to other things I later add that have a value of 1, for example. So now let's say, what is another good option for my build? Totem damage. I'll say totem damage is a good option for my build, but it's not as valuable as life, so I'll give it a primary weighting of 1 compared to the 2 of life. So now when I search, I get life jewel here because this one has a lot higher. It's prioritizing the life. As I scroll down though, there's a pretty comparable jewel that has 2 totem damages. As I scroll down further, I might get ones that have a bit of totem damage. Sometimes they won't have totem damage because I didn't make it mandatory. Once again, of course, I could say I want at least 1 totem damage and then create a new search. So now they'll be guaranteed to have at least 1 totem damage, 1 intimidate, and life. However, because I didn't make the life mandatory, I didn't put any number here, as I scroll down very far on this list, I might actually start to see jewels that don't have life. That's because although it's given a high weighting, this combined weight of this jewel is valued at 2. The tool says this jewel fits your request, but it's not that good. It has the 2 that you absolutely must have, but it doesn't have any higher weighting than that because it doesn't have any life. As we scroll up and up and up and up the list, we'll start to see ones with higher weighting because they push to the top, and those will start to have more of the affixes that we've listed and maybe start to see some life. So go ahead and add any other affixes you like. Fizz taken as fire is fantastic. I'll add that and I'll say I absolutely must have that. I don't absolutely have to have the damage. That's just a nice to have. So I'll leave that on the list there. Now, the more things you add to the list that you don't make mandatory, the more options of jewels you'll have. So it's a good idea to populate the list with all of the things that you consider to be pretty good, but make them non-mandatory. The more things that you make mandatory with that minimum node weight, the harder it will be for your list to give you a list of jewels. The more restricted your search will be. So I suggest adding maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 must-haves, and then leaving the other ones as nice-to-haves and giving them higher weightings if you particularly like them, like for example the life. I'll add double damage and give it a nice weighting. I'll add leech but give it a low weighting because I don't particularly consider it too strong. I'll add totem placement speed and give it a low weighting as well. Now I'll do my search. Now this is giving me a pretty decent list here. If you see a very small list, you've probably been way too restricted with your search results. I see because I've made a longer list now with lots of different good options, I start to see jewels that are overall a bit more powerful according to my rankings. So I've got a combined node weight 10, one here at the very top, that has intimidate, 2 instances of life, totem damage, yada 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 yada. Excellent stuff. Now, what's the chance that someone dropped this very specific jewel, a jewel with that number 14479? Pretty low, honestly, but you can set up a live search, and the way that this works is effectively you go through the list. So what we do is we click copy trade URL, and that copies the first 4 listed here, and we can then go ahead and try and make this a little bit easier for ourselves. Open up the trade website and copy paste that into the search bar. And we'll just press enter and see if we get anything. Now you could set up live searches for a few of these if you wanted to, so that if anyone does get one and puts it on the market, you'll get booped. And then you'll know that it's there and you can try and get it if it looks like it's a good price for you. So it might not be a bad idea to take like the top 3 sets of 4 and set live searches for them, just so that you can maybe one day find your god tier jewel. It's up to you if you want to go that far. If not, copy the next trade URL, put it in. Already on my second one, I got a hit actually. Now what we can do is we can look at the number 17425 and see what that is. 17425. That's a jewel with Intimidate, 2 lives, Fizz taken as fire, 2 instances of leech, and 1 instance of totem placement speed. A pretty nice jewel, and only 27 chaos. In fact, I think that's better than my current jewel. Very nice. I found an upgrade, wee. So you can get an idea of how that works. If you don't find something though, of course, or if the ones you find are like, whoa, okay, that's way too expensive, we can simply copy the next one, create a new tab, and continue the search. Copy next, create a new one. Now, obviously, as you get further and further down the list, the jewel is going to get worse and worse. But if you've set the main things you care about as mandatory with that minimum node weight, then you at least know that you're going to get that. So we can keep going until we get something else. Now, you may not find something. There's a lot of different jewels, and depending on how restricted you were with your search, maybe you made it a bit hard. But I got another hit just there. Now, this is a very expensive one. For some reason, it's listed at 3 divine. 12949. 12949 is Intimidate, Life, Totem damage, Fizz taken as fire, and double damage. That one's probably pretty expensive because this person has actually probably looked at this jewel in some of these locations and noticed that it actually has pretty good stats for this. Now, I'm playing a pretty popular build. If you're playing a pretty popular build and you're using a very obvious jewel slot and you're searching for very popular affixes, then some people that are clever and know about this tool may actually have priced their jewel accordingly. But sometimes, and actually I find quite often, like I did earlier, you'll find jewels that just get priced at the minimum price, whatever the current market price is for timeless jewels that people haven't checked. And I mean, that's fair because there are so many different slots and so many different builds that timeless jewels can go in that nearly any timeless jewel might be good for someone. If you're playing a particularly obscure build or using an unusual passive tree location, then you might be able to find a really, really god tier jewel without it being priced accordingly. So obviously this is an insanely powerful feature, and there is a few other things here. There's like the secondary node weight. I'm not quite sure how that works. I think that might be for certain affixes that have some extra detail to it. I don't know how that works yet, but I haven't needed to use that. There's also this fallback node system that's supposed to give you like an alternate secondary sorting effect. I haven't had that work successfully, so I'm not exactly sure why that was. I think maybe it might be something to do with just my PoB being not fully set up, but again, I haven't needed to use that. Just this setup that I've been using, I've found to be extremely sufficient for at least looking for lethal prides like this, and hopefully you do too. But feel free to tinker with those other features and see what you learn, and I'll have an explore of it more in the future. But I wanted to get this out there and give you a look at this awesome new feature of Path of Building and how you can actually find some pretty perfect timeless jewels now in a pretty reliable fashion. Anyway, folks, that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D. Thanks for watching.